The gunshot echoed through Salida, Colorado like a thunderclap, sending Olivia Zimmerman stumbling behind the livery stable as the last light of day faded across the mountain peaks. Her hand pressed against her swollen belly, protecting the life within as she struggled to catch her breath in the thin mountain air. 6 months pregnant, alone, and now fleeing for her life from the man who'd sworn to love her, Olivia had never imagined her life would come to this. Autumn of 1878 was turning cold early in the high mountain valley. The scent of pine and horse dung mingled in the cooling evening air as Olivia pressed her back against the rough wooden wall of the livery, sliding down until she sat on the hard, packed dirt. Her calico dress, once fine enough for Sunday services back in St. Louis, was now travel-stained and torn at the hem. The small carpet bag beside her contained everything she had left in the world. "I'll kill you if you try to leave." Her husband's words still rang in her ears, followed by the deafening blast of his pistol firing into the ceiling of their rented room at the hotel. Frederick hadn't been drinking, that was the worst part. His rage was cold, calculating, and entirely sober when he discovered the money she'd been secretly saving. Olivia closed her eyes as tears streamed down her dirt-smudged face. The baby kicked, a reassuring flutter beneath her ribs. At least this little one was still fighting, even if its mother was at the end of her rope. "Madam, you all right back there?" The voice startled her so badly she nearly cried out. A tall silhouette stood at the corner of the building, the dying sunlight creating a halo around the wide brim of a cowboy hat. "Please," she whispered, "don't tell anyone I'm here." The figure stepped closer, and she could make out his features now, a young man, perhaps 25, with an earnest face weathered by sun and wind. He crouched down, keeping a respectful distance. "Name's Ethan Cooper, madam. I work here at Donovan's livery. Heard someone crying and—" "Well, couldn't just ride on by, if you'll pardon the expression." His eyes, a clear blue that reminded her of the Colorado sky, moved to her belly and then quickly back to her face, a flicker of understanding passing across his features. "I have nowhere to go," Olivia admitted, her voice barely audible. "My husband, he's not a good man. I was trying to leave town on tomorrow's stage, but he found the money I'd saved. I ran when he—" "No need to explain, madam," Ethan said gently. He removed his hat, revealing hair the color of sun-bleached wheat. "Stage doesn't come through again for 3 days. You can't stay out here, though. Not with winter coming on early this year, and especially not in your condition." "I can't go back to him," Olivia said, a new steel entering her voice despite her tears. "I won't." Ethan nodded slowly. "I wouldn't suggest it. Look here, there's a small room in the loft where I sleep. It ain't much, but it's warm and private. You can stay there tonight and we'll figure something out in the morning." Olivia studied his face, searching for any hint of deception or ill intent. All she saw was genuine concern. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." A sad smile crossed Ethan's face. "My sister was in a similar way once. Nobody helped her when she needed it most." He cleared his throat. "I'm not asking for anything in return, madam, just offering shelter to someone who needs it." Against her better judgment, Olivia found herself nodding. "Thank you, Mr. Cooper." "Just Ethan, please." He stood and offered his hand. "Can you walk, Miss?" "Mrs. Zimmerman, Olivia Zimmerman." She took his hand and let him help her to her feet, though I don't think I'll be carrying that name much longer if I can help it. Ethan picked up her carpet bag. "This way, Mrs. Zimmerman. Watch your step, some of these boards are loose." He led her through a small door at the back of the stable and up a narrow staircase to a loft area that smelled of fresh hay and leather. A single oil lamp hung from a beam, casting a warm glow over the modest space. A narrow cot with a wool blanket, a trunk at its foot, A small table with a basin and pitcher and a chair were the only furnishings. "It's not much," he said, suddenly self-conscious. "It's perfect," Olivia replied honestly. After weeks of running, any safe place felt like a palace. "But I can't take your bed. You're not. I usually bed down with the horses when I'm on night watch anyway. Mr. Donovan pays me extra to sleep here and keep an eye on things." He set her bag down by the cot. "I'll bring you some supper from the kitchen, Mrs. Donovan always makes extra and she won't ask questions." Olivia sank onto the edge of the cot, overwhelmed by the simple kindness. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need, madam. Just rest easy knowing you're safe for tonight." After Ethan left, Olivia looked around the humble room that represented the first moment of peace she'd known in months. She placed her hand on her belly and whispered to her unborn child, "Maybe there are still good men in this world after all." When Ethan returned with a plate of stew, cornbread, and a cup of tea, he found her asleep sitting up, her head tilted against the wall. He quietly set the food on the small table and was about to leave when he noticed her shivering in her sleep. The nights were getting colder, and her dress was too thin for the mountain autumn. He carefully draped his spare blanket over her, then slipped out to check on the horses. As he forked fresh hay into the stalls, his mind kept returning to the pregnant woman sleeping in his loft. Where could she go? The town of Salida was small, barely 5 years old since the railroad had come through, and everyone knew everyone's business. If her husband was looking for her, and Ethan had no doubt he was, it wouldn't be long before someone mentioned seeing a strange woman at the livery. Ethan had always minded his own affairs, keeping to himself and his work. But something about Olivia Zimmerman's quiet dignity in the face of desperation stirred something protective in him. She needed more than just a night's shelter, she needed a way out. As he worked through the evening, checking the horses and securing the stable for the night, a plan began to form in his mind. It was risky, and it might cost him his job, but he couldn't just send her back out there with winter coming and a baby on the way. By morning, he knew what he had to do. Olivia woke to the smell of coffee and the soft clink of a spoon against a cup. She blinked in the gray light of dawn filtering through the single small window of the loft. "Morning, Mrs. Zimmerman," Ethan said, setting a steaming mug on the table beside a plate of eggs and toast. "Thought you might be hungry." She sat up, adjusting her disheveled hair. "You didn't have to do that. Weren't no trouble. Mrs. Donovan thinks I've developed quite the appetite lately." He smiled, but it faded quickly. "We need to talk about your situation, if you don't mind." "Your husband, he in town looking for you." Olivia's hand instinctively moved to her belly. "Frederick arrived about a month ago. He's a gambler. Said he had business opportunities in Salida, but I think he was running from debts in Denver." She took a sip of coffee before continuing. "He wasn't always like this. When we married in St. Louis 2 years ago, he was charming, successful. Then the drinking started and the gambling. When I told him about the baby, he seemed happy at first, but then—" "You don't need to tell me more if it pains you," Ethan said gently. "No, you deserve to know why you're risking helping me." She straightened her shoulders. "He started hitting me about 4 months ago, said I trapped him with this child. When I found money missing from the household funds, money meant for the doctor and baby things, I confronted him. He broke my wrist." She held up her left arm, which Ethan now noticed she favored slightly. "That's when I knew I had to leave. I started hiding whatever coins I could, planning to take the stage to California where my cousin lives." Ethan's jaw tightened. "A man who raises his hand to his wife is no man at all in my book." "He'll be looking for me," Olivia said, fear creeping back into her voice. "He's likely already checked the stage office." "I figured as much. That's why I've been thinking." Ethan pulled the chair closer and sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I have a small cabin up Chalk Creek, about 15 miles from town. It ain't much, just a one-room affair I built when I first came to these parts 3 years back. I stay at the Livery most nights now because the work is steady, but I keep the cabin for hunting season and just to have a place of my own." Olivia looked at him with confusion. "I don't understand what. You could stay there," he said quickly. "Just until the baby comes, or until you figure out a way to get to your cousin. It's remote, but it's solid shelter with a good stove. No one would think to look for you there." Her eyes widened. "Mr. Cooper, I couldn't possibly." "Ethan, please. And yes, you could. I'm offering freely." "But what about your job? Your life here?" he shrugged. "I'll keep working at the Livery, ride up to check on you when I can. Mr. Donovan gives me 2 days off a week. Nobody questions where I go. Folks around here respect a man's privacy." Olivia stared into her coffee cup, clearly overwhelmed. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had an edge of pain. "My sister Martha was married to a man like your Frederick. She ran too when she was carrying her first child. Nobody would help her. She died on the road somewhere between Kansas City and Topeka in the dead of winter." His eyes met hers. "I was 15 then, too young to do anything but mourn her. I'm not that helpless boy anymore." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. "I'm so sorry about your sister." "I couldn't help her," he said simply. "But I can help you if you'll let me." The silence stretched between them, filled with the sounds of the waking stable horses nickering, the distant shouts of workers beginning their day. "All right," Olivia finally said. "But I'll find a way to repay you, I promise." Ethan shook his head. "No debt between us. You just focus on keeping yourself and that baby healthy." He stood up. "I need to finish my morning chores, then I'll borrow Mr. Donovan's wagon to take you up to the cabin. Can you be ready to leave in about an hour?" "I don't have much to ready," she said with a small smile, gesturing to her single carpet bag. "I'll bring some supplies. There's canned goods at the cabin, but you'll need more than that." After Ethan left, Olivia ate the breakfast he'd brought, savoring each bite. For the first time in months, hope flickered within her. She had no illusions about her situation. She was still a married woman, pregnant and alone with few prospects. But at least she had a temporary sanctuary, thanks to the unexpected kindness of a stranger. When Ethan returned, he brought a bundle of clothes. "These belonged to Mrs. Donovan's daughter before she married and moved to Pueblo. She's about your size, I reckon, and Mrs. Donovan was happy to pass them along when I said they were for a friend in need." "You told her about me?" Olivia asked, alarmed. "No details. Just that a friend needed help. Mrs. Donovan's not one to pry, and her husband's even less so. They're good people." Olivia accepted the clothes gratefully, a warm woolen dress, a shawl, and even a nightgown. "How did you explain needing these?" "Didn't have to explain much. Half the town thinks I've got a sweetheart hidden away somewhere anyway, on account of how I keep to myself." He blushed slightly at the implication. "Folks are used to me being private about my affairs." They left Salida just as the town was coming fully to life, taking a back road out to avoid the main street where Frederick might be looking for her. Olivia kept her head down, the borrowed shawl pulled over her hair, but nobody paid much attention to yet another wagon heading out of town. The journey to Ethan's cabin took most of the day. They followed the Arkansas River for a while before turning up Chalk Creek, the wagon jolting over the increasingly rough terrain. Olivia tried not to wince at each bump and jar, not wanting Ethan to worry more than he already was. The valley narrowed as they climbed, the creek tumbling beside them in a series of small waterfalls. Aspen trees shimmered with golden leaves that would soon fall with the first heavy snow. Ethan pointed out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a bend in the creek where he liked to fish, a grove of pines where deer often sheltered. "It's beautiful here," Olivia said, breathing in the clean mountain air. "Peaceful. That it is. First time I saw these mountains, I knew I'd never leave. There's something about them that gets into your blood." Late in the afternoon, they rounded a bend, and Ethan's cabin came into view. It was indeed small, built of logs with a stone chimney, set in a clearing with the creek running nearby and forest rising behind it. A lean-to shelter stood to one side, and a small corral was attached to the back. "Like I said, it ain't much," Ethan said as he helped her down from the wagon. "It's wonderful," she replied honestly. After weeks in noisy hotels and boarding houses, the quiet solitude of the place felt like a blessing. The inside of the cabin was simple but comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking area beside it. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs sat in the center. A bed frame with a straw-filled mattress was built into one corner, covered with several wool blankets. Shelves held books, canned goods, and various tools. Everything was neat and organized, if somewhat dusty from disuse. "I'll get a fire going," Ethan said, already moving to the hearth. "Gets cold quick once the sun starts to set." While he worked on the fire, Olivia explored her temporary home. Through the single window, she could see the mountains rising majestically, already dusted with early snow at their highest peaks. The cabin itself was sturdy, the chinking between the logs well maintained. It might be small, but it was sound. "I'll sleep in the lean-to," Ethan said as he coaxed the fire to life. "It's where I keep my tack and tools, but there's room for a bedroll." Olivia turned to him, alarmed. "You're staying?" "Just for tonight, to make sure everything's in working order. I'll ride back to town tomorrow." He stood up, dusting his hands on his jeans. "Unless you'd rather I left now." "No," she said quickly, surprising herself. "No, it's fine. I don't want to put you out any more than I already have." "You're not putting me out. This is my home too, remember? I'm just sharing it for a spell." As twilight descended, they ate a simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread that Ethan prepared on the cast iron stove. Sitting across the small table from him, Olivia studied her unlikely benefactor. In the flickering firelight, his features were softer, less weathered. He couldn't be more than 25 or 26, she guessed, though life in the West aged men quickly. "How long have you been in Colorado?" she asked. "Coming on 5 years now. Came west from Missouri after my folks passed. Started as a ranch hand down near Pueblo, then drifted up this way." He took a sip of coffee. "What about you? You don't seem like you were born to frontier life." Olivia smiled sadly. "Is it that obvious? I grew up in St. Louis. My father was a school teacher, my mother a seamstress. They wanted me to become a teacher too, but I met Frederick at 19 and was married by 20. She looked down at her wedding ring, a plain gold band that now felt like a shackle. "He had ambitions to make his fortune in the West, said a man could still stake his claim out here. I believed him." "The West breaks some men," Ethan said quietly. "Builds others up. Depends on what you're made of inside, I reckon." They fell into comfortable silence as the fire crackled and the wind whispered around the cabin's eaves. Olivia felt her eyelids growing heavy, the exhaustion of her ordeal finally catching up with her. "You should rest," Ethan said, noticing her fatigue. "I'll clean up here." Too tired to protest, Olivia retreated behind a makeshift screen Ethan had set up for privacy and changed into the borrowed nightgown. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, and the pile of blankets kept the autumn chill at bay. As she drifted toward sleep, she heard Ethan moving quietly around the cabin, banking the fire for the night, putting things in order. There was something deeply comforting about his presence, a steady, gentle strength that asked nothing in return. For the first time in months, Olivia Zimmerman fell asleep without fear. The days began to settle into a routine. Ethan returned to Salida the morning after bringing Olivia to the cabin, but he came back 3 days later with more supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, dried meat, and even some fresh apples. He also brought news that Frederick Zimmerman was indeed searching for his wife, offering a reward for information about her whereabouts. "He's telling folks you ran off with money that wasn't yours," Ethan reported as he stacked firewood by the hearth. "Says you're confused on account of your condition, that you need to be found for your own safety." Olivia's hands trembled as she kneaded bread dough. "And people believe him. Some might. He can be persuasive when he wants to be, I gather, but Marshall Taylor's not a fool. He asked me if I'd seen you, given that you might have come by the livery looking for transport." She froze. "What did you say?" "Told him I hadn't seen any woman matching your description. Not a lie, since I first saw you behind the livery, not in it." Ethan's mouth quirked in a half-smile. The marshal nodded and moved on. "I don't think he's putting much effort into the search." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you." "Nothing to thank me for, just telling the truth, more or less." He paused in his work. "Your husband's been spending most of his time at the Silver Dollar Saloon, from what I hear, gambling and drinking away whatever money he has left." "That sounds like Frederick," Olivia said bitterly. "He always loved cards more than anything else." Ethan visited twice a week after that, bringing supplies and news from town. He never stayed long, usually just a few hours to check that everything was in working order, repair anything that needed fixing, and make sure Olivia had enough firewood and water. Sometimes he brought books from the town's small lending library, knowing she enjoyed reading. During one visit in late October, as the aspen stood naked against the sky and the creek began to freeze at its edges, Ethan arrived with an unusual load in his wagon: lumber, tools, and what looked like pieces of furniture. "What's all this?" Olivia asked, coming out to meet him despite the biting cold. Ethan looked almost embarrassed. "Well, I was thinking, the baby will be here in a few months and you'll need, that is, the little one will need somewhere to sleep." Olivia stared at him, realization dawning. "You're building a crib." "If that's all right, figured it was something practical I could do to help." He began unloading the wood. "Got some nice pine from the sawmill. Mr. Donovan let me use some of his tools too. You know how to build furniture. My pa was a carpenter before he took up farming. Taught me a thing or two." He shrugged as if it were nothing, but the tips of his ears had turned red, and Olivia didn't think it was from the cold. Over the next few visits, in between his other chores, Ethan worked on the crib. Olivia watched with growing amazement as rough boards were transformed into something beautiful. He worked with quiet concentration, measuring twice, cutting once, his strong hands surprisingly delicate as they shaped the wood. "You should have been a craftsman," she told him one afternoon as she brought him a cup of coffee. "You have a gift for it." "Just something I enjoy," he said, but she could tell he was pleased by the compliment. Never had much chance to make things just for the pleasure of it. Always been working for wages, taking whatever jobs came along. "What would you do if you could choose anything?" she asked, genuinely curious about this man who had upended his life to help her. Ethan thought for a moment, planing a piece of wood with smooth, even strokes. "Always thought I might like to have a place of my own, a small ranch, nothing fancy. Raise horses, maybe, be my own man." "That sounds lovely," Olivia said softly. "Everyone should have a dream." "What about you?" he asked. "What would you do if you could choose anything?" The question caught her off guard. For so long, she'd been focused on survival, on escape, that she hadn't allowed herself to think beyond the immediate future. "I don't know," she admitted. Before I married Frederick, I wanted to be a teacher like my father. Now I just want my baby to be safe and happy." "That's a good dream, too," Ethan said. "The best kind, maybe." As November deepened toward winter, Ethan's visits became more frequent. He was worried about the snow making the trail impassable, about Olivia being too isolated as her time grew closer. He brought a rocking chair on one trip, found it at Widow Jensen's estate sale, thought you might like it, and spent a day fixing the door that had begun to stick with the changing weather. Olivia found herself looking forward to his visits more than she wanted to admit. The days alone in the cabin were peaceful, giving her time to rest and prepare for the baby, but they were also lonely. Ethan's presence brought not just practical help, but companionship, conversation, and a growing sense of security she hadn't felt in years. She began to notice things about him, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, how he always removed his hat when entering the cabin no matter how briefly he was staying, the gentle way he spoke about the horses in his care. He never complained about the extra work her presence created, never made her feel she was a burden. One evening in early December, a fierce storm blew in from the mountains. Ethan had arrived just before it hit, bringing extra supplies in anticipation of worsening weather. "I should get back to town," he said as the wind began to howl around the cabin, but even as he said it, he was looking doubtfully at the rapidly darkening sky. "Don't be ridiculous," Olivia said firmly. "You can't ride in this. You'll freeze before you make it halfway down the mountain." He hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and common sense. "I don't want to impose. It's your cabin," she reminded him with a small smile, "and I'd rather not worry about you freezing to death on my account." The storm lasted 3 days, keeping them confined to the small cabin. At first, there was an awkwardness between them, a careful maintaining of distance and formality. But as the hours passed, as they shared meals and conversation by the warmth of the fire, the stiffness gradually melted away. Ethan told her stories of his childhood in Missouri, of his sister Martha, whom he'd loved dearly, of his dreams of someday having a place where he truly belonged. Olivia shared memories of her parents, of the books she'd loved as a girl, of the teaching position she'd almost accepted before Frederick proposed. On the second night, as they sat by the fire after supper, Olivia felt the baby move more vigorously than ever before. "Oh!" she exclaimed, pressing her hand to her side. Ethan looked up from the piece of wood he was whittling, alarmed. "Are you all right? Is it the baby?" "Yes, but everything's fine," she reassured him. "He's just very active tonight, here." Without thinking, she reached for his hand. "You can feel it." She placed his hand on her belly, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the baby kicked again, a strong movement against Ethan's palm. His eyes widened in wonder. That's something," he said softly, his voice filled with awe. Olivia suddenly realized the intimacy of the moment and started to pull away, but Ethan's free hand covered hers gently. "Thank you," he said, "for letting me feel that. It's a miracle, isn't it?" "Yes," she whispered. "It is." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of feelings that had been growing unacknowledged. But Ethan respectfully withdrew his hand and returned to his whittling, and the moment passed, leaving only a warm glow in its wake. By the time the storm cleared and the trail was passable again, something fundamental had changed. They moved around each other more comfortably. Their conversations flowed more easily, and there was an unspoken understanding that they were no longer merely two strangers thrown together by circumstance. The crib was finished just before Christmas, a beautiful piece of craftsmanship with smooth sanded rails and gentle curves. Ethan had even carved small stars along the headboard. "It's beautiful," Olivia said, running her fingers over the polished wood. "I've never had anything so finely made." "Wanted it to be right," Ethan said simply. "The baby deserves something nice to sleep in." He'd placed it near the bed, but not quite next to it, a small but significant gesture of respect for her space and privacy. But as Olivia looked at the crib standing there, she was struck by a sudden realization. "You built the crib before thinking about a proper bed for me," she said wonderingly. Ethan looked confused. "What do you mean?" "When you brought all those supplies that first time, it was for the baby's crib, not for a better bed for me. You thought of the baby first." He shrugged, embarrassed. "Well, you already had a bed such as it is. The little one didn't have anything." Tears sprang to Olivia's eyes. "That's the difference between you and Frederick. He never once thought about what the baby would need. Not once." She wiped away a tear. "But you, a man who owes us nothing, you built a crib before even considering if the bed was good enough for me." "Any decent man would do the same," Ethan said, uncomfortable with her praise. "No," Olivia said firmly. "They wouldn't. Believe me, I know." That night, after Ethan had gone to sleep in the lean-to, Olivia lay awake, her hands resting on her swollen belly. The baby moved beneath her palms, a comforting reminder of the new life that would soon join her. But for the first time, she allowed herself to think not just of the baby's future but of her own. What would happen after the birth? She couldn't stay in Ethan's cabin forever. Eventually, she would need to make her way to California, to her cousin who didn't even know she was coming. She would be a single mother with few skills and fewer prospects. And what of Ethan? Would he simply go back to his life at the Livery, visiting the cabin occasionally to maintain it? The thought left a hollow feeling in her chest that she wasn't ready to examine too closely. Christmas came with a fresh blanket of snow that transformed the mountain valley into a glittering wonderland. Ethan arrived on Christmas Eve with a small pine tree strapped to his saddle and a package wrapped in brown paper. "Thought you might like some Christmas cheer," he said as he set up the tree in a corner of the cabin. Olivia was touched by the gesture. "I didn't get you anything," she said regretfully. "I didn't even think." "Don't need anything," he assured her. "But I got something for you for the baby, really." He handed her the package. Inside was a small patchwork quilt, clearly handmade but with neat, even stitches. "Mrs. Donovan helped," he admitted. "I'm not much good with a needle, but I wanted the baby to have something warm." Olivia ran her fingers over the colorful squares. "It's perfect. Thank you, Ethan." They shared a simple Christmas dinner of rabbit stew and cornbread with dried apple pie for dessert. As they ate, Ethan gave her news from town. "Your husband's still there," he said carefully, "but he's mostly given up looking for you. Word is he's deep in debt to some men from Denver who have come to collect. Marshal Taylor's keeping an eye on the situation." Olivia nodded, unsurprised. Frederick's debts always caught up with him eventually. "As long as he doesn't find us here, that's all that matters." "He won't," Ethan promised. "Nobody in town connects me to you. Far as anyone knows, I'm just going about my business as usual." After dinner, they sat by the fire, talking quietly as the snow fell outside. "Ethan had brought a bottle of wine, just a small glass for you. Doc says it's all right for expectant mothers in moderation," and the warmth of it spread through Olivia's body, relaxing her. "You ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Taking me in, getting involved in all this?" Ethan looked at her steadily, the firelight reflected in his blue eyes. "Not for a single moment. But I've disrupted your life, put you at risk. You've given me a purpose beyond just earning my next wage," he interrupted gently. "That's worth something. Worth a lot, actually." She studied his face, searching for any hint of resentment or obligation, but found none. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Ethan Cooper." "You'd have found a way," he said with confidence. "You're stronger than you know, Olivia." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it sent a small shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. As January settled over the mountains with bitter cold and deep snow, Olivia's time grew closer. Her movements became more labored, her sleep more difficult. Ethan began staying at the cabin more frequently, worried about leaving her alone for too long with the baby due any day. Mr. Donovan, understanding without being told the full story, arranged for another stable hand to cover some of Ethan's duties. "Take the time you need," he told Ethan. "Family comes first." The implication was clear, though Ethan didn't correct his employer's assumption. Olivia woke one night in late January to a sharp pain that took her breath away. She lay still, waiting to see if it would return, and when it did several minutes later, she knew her time had come. "Ethan," she called, her voice strained. He'd been sleeping in the lean-to but came immediately at her call. "The baby?" he asked, taking in her expression. She nodded, gripping the edge of the bed as another contraction began. "It's starting." Ethan's face paled slightly, but his voice remained calm. "All right. I'll get things ready. We talked about this, remember?" They had indeed discussed what would happen when the time came. Ethan had even ridden to town specifically to speak with the midwife, Mrs. Norwood, getting instructions on what to do if the baby came, and he couldn't fetch her in time. Now he moved with purpose, stoking the fire to warm the cabin, putting water on to boil, gathering clean linens they'd set aside for this purpose. His steady presence calmed Olivia's rising fear as the contractions grew stronger and closer together. "I should ride for Mrs. Norwood," he said, looking out at the heavy snow that had fallen all day. "There's no time," Olivia gasped. "The baby's coming fast, and the trail will be impossible in the dark." Ethan's face showed his conflict, but he nodded. "Then we'll do this ourselves. You're strong, Olivia, you can do this." The next hours were a blur of pain and effort for Olivia. Ethan stayed by her side, holding her hand through contractions, wiping her brow with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement when she felt she couldn't continue. As dawn approached, Olivia gave one final push, and the cabin filled with the lusty cry of a newborn. "It's a boy," Ethan said, his voice choked with emotion as he wrapped the infant in a clean cloth. "A perfect, healthy boy." He placed the baby in Olivia's arms, and she gazed down at her son's red, wrinkled face with a love so fierce it took her breath away. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Ethan moved efficiently around the cabin, cleaning up, bringing Olivia water, making sure both she and the baby were comfortable. When everything was settled, he stood awkwardly by the bed, clearly exhausted but unwilling to leave them. "You should rest," Olivia told him, patting the edge of the bed beside her. "You've earned it." Hesitantly, he sat on the edge of the mattress, gazing at the baby who had fallen asleep in Olivia's arms. "He's something, isn't he?" "Yes, he is." She looked up at Ethan, her heart full. "I was thinking of naming him Matthew. Matthew James, after my father and yours." Ethan's eyes widened in surprise. "You'd name him after my pa, if that's all right with you. I wouldn't be here, Matthew wouldn't be here if not for you, Ethan." He swallowed hard, visibly moved. "I'd be honored," he said simply. As the baby slept peacefully in her arms and Ethan kept watch beside them, Olivia felt a sense of rightness, of home, that she had never experienced before, not in her parents' house in St. Louis. Certainly not in any place she'd lived with Frederick. Here, in this simple cabin with a man who had asked for nothing but given everything, she had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. The days following Matthew's birth passed in a haze of exhaustion and joy for Olivia. Ethan proved surprisingly adept with the newborn, holding him confidently while Olivia rested, helping with diaper changes, and even figuring out how to rock him back to sleep when he fussed. "You're good with him," Olivia remarked one afternoon as Ethan walked the length of the cabin with Matthew nestled against his shoulder. "Have you been around babies before?" "Not really," he admitted. "But he's not so complicated. Mostly wants to be fed, changed, and held." He smiled down at the infant. "Can't say I blame him on that last part." Olivia felt a rush of warmth at the sight of them together. Ethan's tall frame bent protectively over the tiny bundle, his normally weathered face softened with affection. It was becoming increasingly difficult to imagine a future that didn't include him. When Matthew was a week old, Ethan finally made the trip to town, both to report to Mr. Donovan and to bring back more supplies. He returned late in the day, his face grim in a way that instantly alarmed Olivia. "What's happened?" she asked as he shed his snow-covered coat. Ethan glanced at Matthew, asleep in his crib, before answering. "Your husband left town 3 days ago. Apparently, those men from Denver caught up with him. There was a fight at the Silver Dollar and Frederick shot one of them." Olivia gasped. "Is the man?" "He'll live, but it was close. Marshal Taylor tried to arrest Frederick, but he slipped away in the confusion, stole a horse from outside the saloon and rode south." Relief mingled with renewed anxiety in Olivia's chest. "So he's gone, but he's a wanted man now." "Yes. The marshals put out word to law enforcement in surrounding counties, but with this weather, the chances of catching him soon are slim." Ethan set a bundle of packages on the table. "I brought newspapers from the past week. Thought you might want to read about it yourself." Olivia scanned the articles while Ethan prepared a simple dinner. The Salida Mountain Mail described the shooting and Frederick's escape in dramatic detail, referring to him as a dangerous gambler with a violent temper. There was a brief mention of his missing wife, but the article focused primarily on the shooting and subsequent manhunt. "At least he's not looking for me anymore," Olivia said, folding the newspaper. "But I'm still legally his wife." Ethan set a plate of beans and salt pork in front of her. "There are laws about abandonment. After a certain period, you might be able to file for divorce on those grounds, especially now that he's a fugitive." "Perhaps." Olivia pushed the food around her plate, her appetite gone. "But that means waiting, possibly for years." "You have time," Ethan said gently. "You and Matthew are safe here for as long as you need to be." She looked up at him, struck by the simple generosity of his statement. "We can't impose on you forever, Ethan. It's not an imposition." He met her gaze steadily. "Having you both here, it's made this place feel like a home for the first time." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning neither was quite ready to voice. Olivia's heart beat faster as she recognized the truth in what he said. This cabin had become more of a home to her in a few months than any place she'd lived with Frederick in 2 years. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." As February mellowed into March and the iron grip of winter began to loosen, life in the cabin settled into a new routine centered around Matthew's needs. Ethan continued to split his time between town and the cabin, though he stayed at the latter more often than not. He began making improvements to the small dwelling, adding shelves, reinforcing the lean-to, digging a proper cellar for storing food. It was as if he were nesting, preparing the place for long-term habitation rather than the temporary shelter it had been. Olivia noticed these changes but didn't comment on them, afraid to presume too much. Her feelings for Ethan had grown beyond gratitude into something deeper, more complex, but her situation remained precarious. She was still legally married to a fugitive, with a newborn son and few resources of her own. One mild afternoon in late March, as the first wildflowers began to appear in sunny patches where the snow had melted, Ethan returned from town with surprising news. "Marshal Taylor received a telegram from the sheriff in Durango," he said as he unsaddled his horse. They found a body in the mountains south of there. They think it's Frederick. Olivia sat down hard on the bench outside the cabin, Matthew sleeping against her shoulder. Are they certain? Not entirely. The man had papers identifying him as Frederick Zimmerman and the description matches, but the body, well, it had been there a while. Animals got to it. Ethan sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. They want someone to identify some personal effects. I told the marshal I'd let you know. A complex wave of emotions washed over Olivia: relief, guilt, a strange sense of grief for the man Frederick had been when they first met, before alcohol and gambling consumed him. If it is him, what happens? She asked. Legally speaking, you'd be a widow. Free to make your own choices. The implication hung in the air between them. Free to remarry should she choose to, free to build a new life. I should go to Durango, she said, to identify the items. Ethan nodded. I thought you might say that. I can take you when you're ready. It's a few days' ride, but the trails are clearing now that spring's coming. 2 weeks later, with Matthew securely bundled against the lingering chill, they made the journey to Durango. They traveled slowly, stopping frequently for Olivia to feed and tend to the baby. Ethan was endlessly patient, finding the most comfortable camping spots, ensuring they had plenty of provisions, and keeping watch through the nights. In Durango, the sheriff showed Olivia a pocket watch, a silver money clip, and a unique deck of cards with an ornate backing that she recognized immediately as Frederick's prized possession. That's his, she confirmed, her voice steady. The watch was a gift from his father. He never went anywhere without that deck of cards. The sheriff nodded sympathetically. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Zimmerman. From what we can piece together, he got caught in a late February blizzard. Happens to folks who don't know these mountains. Olivia accepted his condolences quietly, feeling oddly detached from the proceedings. Frederick had made his choices, and they had led him to a lonely death in the mountains. She could feel sorry for that without regretting her own decision to leave. The sheriff provided her with official documentation of Frederick's death, which she carefully stored in her bag. With these papers, she was legally a widow, free to begin again. They stayed one night in Durango before starting the journey back to Chalk Creek. As they made camp the first evening, Matthew sleeping peacefully in a makeshift cradle, Ethan broached a subject that had clearly been on his mind. What will you do now? He asked, poking at the campfire with a stick. Will you go to California to your cousin? Olivia looked at him across the flames, seeing the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he avoided her gaze. Do you want me to go? She asked directly, his head snapped up. No. The vehemence of his response seemed to surprise even him. More quietly, he added, No, I don't want you to go. But I wouldn't hold you here if you wanted to leave. And if I wanted to stay? Her heart hammered in her chest as she asked the question. Ethan set the stick down and looked at her fully, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. Then I'd be the happiest man in Colorado. Olivia took a deep breath. I've been thinking about what happens next, about what I want for Matthew and for myself. She glanced at her sleeping son. I want him to grow up somewhere stable with people who love him. I want him to have fresh air and mountains and a place that feels like home. The cabin could be that place, Ethan said carefully. With some work, it could be a proper home. It already feels like home, Olivia admitted, but not because of the walls or the roof. Because you're there. The confession hung in the night air between them. Ethan's expression softened, hope replacing the uncertainty in his eyes. Slowly, he moved around the fire to sit beside her. Olivia, he said, taking her hand gently in his. I've never been good with words. I'm a simple man with simple dreams. But since the day I found you behind that livery, those dreams have changed, grown bigger. Now they include you and Matthew. Tears sprang to Olivia's eyes. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I love you," he said simply. "I love Matthew too, like he was my own. And if you'll have me, I'd like to build a life with you both." "It won't be easy," she warned, even as joy bloomed in her chest. "I'm still healing from everything with Frederick. And caring for a baby, trying to make a living, nothing worth having comes easy," Ethan interrupted gently. "But we'd face it together. That's what matters." Olivia looked into his earnest face, this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved, who had built a crib before thinking of a bed, who had asked for nothing but given everything. And she knew with sudden clarity what her heart had been telling her for months. "I love you too," she whispered. His smile illuminated his face as he leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Olivia closed the distance between them, meeting his lips with hers in a kiss that felt like coming home. When they returned to the cabin a few days later, they did so with new purpose. Spring was truly taking hold now, the creek running full with snowmelt, new green shoots appearing in the clearing around the cabin. "I've been thinking," Ethan said as they settled back in. "Mr. Donovan's been talking about selling some of his stock. With what I've saved, I could buy a few horses, start breeding them here. There's enough land, especially if we expand the corral." "You'd leave your job at the livery?" Olivia asked. "Eventually. I'd keep working there while we got established here." He looked around the cabin with a critical eye. "We'd need to expand this place too. Add a proper bedroom, enlarge the main room." Olivia smiled at his enthusiasm. "You've given this some thought. Been thinking about it since Christmas, if I'm honest." He took her hands in his. "What do you think? Could you see us building a life here?" Looking around the small cabin that had sheltered her in her darkest hour, that had witnessed the birth of her son and the blossoming of unexpected love, Olivia couldn't imagine being anywhere else. "Yes," she said. "This is exactly where I want to be." They were married on a perfect June day in 1879, in a small ceremony outside the cabin, with Matthew, now 5 months old, cooing happily in Mrs. Donovan's arms. The justice of the peace rode up from Salida. Along with a handful of friends Ethan had made in town, the Donovans, Marshall Taylor and his wife, Mrs. Norwood the midwife who had checked on both Olivia and Matthew once the trails cleared. Olivia wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Donovan had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair. Ethan, looking uncomfortable but proud in a new shirt and polished boots, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him through the meadow now bright with summer blooms. The justice spoke the traditional words, but it was the vows they had written themselves that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "Olivia," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident on his face. "When I found you that night, I was just trying to do the right thing. I never imagined that doing right would bring me so much happiness. You and Matthew are my family, my home, my heart. I promise to protect you both, to provide for you, to love you through whatever life brings, for all the days we're given." Olivia squeezed his hands, her own voice wavering slightly as she responded. "Ethan, you built a crib before the bed that tells me everything I need to know about the man you are. You put others before yourself. You see needs before they're spoken. You love with actions more than words. I promise to stand beside you, to build our dream together, to make this cabin a home filled with love and laughter. You saved my life, but more than that, you showed me what love should be." As they exchanged rings, simple gold bands purchased with the proceeds from Ethan's first horse sale, the justice pronounced them husband and wife. Ethan kissed her with reverence and joy as their small audience applauded. The celebration afterward was modest, but joyful. A feast spread on tables outside the cabin. music from Marshall Taylor's fiddle, dancing in the meadow as the sun began to set behind the mountains. Matthew was passed from arm to arm, admired and cooed over by everyone present. As twilight descended and their guests prepared to make the journey back to town, Olivia found herself standing with Ethan at the edge of the clearing, Matthew sleeping against her shoulder. "Happy?" Ethan asked, his arm around her waist. Olivia leaned into him, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky. "More than I ever thought possible. We should think of a name," he said, gesturing toward the cabin and the surrounding land. "Every ranch needs a name." Olivia considered for a moment, then smiled. "What about Second Chance Ranch? Because that's what you gave me, what we've given each other." Ethan nodded, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Second Chance Ranch it is." Epilogue. Spring 1884. The sound of children's laughter floated through the open windows of the expanded cabin, now a proper house with 3 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Olivia smiled as she kneaded bread dough, watching through the window as Ethan led 5-year-old Matthew on a pony around the corral, the boy's face alight with pride and concentration. 2-year-old Emma played in a pen Ethan had built on the porch, chattering happily to her rag doll. With her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes, she was a perfect blend of them both, stubborn and sweet in equal measure. Second Chance Ranch had flourished in the 5 years since their wedding. What had begun with 2 mares and a stallion was now a respectable operation, with Ethan's carefully bred horses sought after throughout the Arkansas Valley. Olivia had started a small school for the children of neighboring ranchers and miners, teaching 3 days a week in a converted outbuilding. Their life wasn't without challenges: harsh winters, the occasional illness, the constant work of maintaining a ranch in the high country. But they faced each difficulty together, their partnership stronger for the trials they'd weathered. As Olivia set the bread to rise, the door opened and Ethan entered with Matthew on his shoulders. "Mama," the boy called excitedly. "I rode Daisy all by myself. Papa only held the lead rope, I saw," Olivia said, smiling at her son's flushed, happy face. "You're becoming quite the horseman." "Just like Papa," Matthew declared proudly as Ethan swung him down. "Go wash up for lunch," Olivia instructed, ruffling his dark hair. As the boy scampered off, Ethan crossed to where Olivia stood, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "He's a natural," he said, pride evident in his voice. "Got a good seat and steady hands." "Of course he does," Olivia said, leaning back against her husband's chest. "He's had an excellent teacher." Ethan pressed a kiss to her neck. "I got a letter from that rancher in Wyoming. He wants to buy 2 of the yearlings. If the price is right, we might be able to add that second pasture we've been talking about." "That's wonderful news." Olivia turned in his arms to face him. "And I have some news of my own." His eyebrows raised in question. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. We're going to have another baby come winter." Joy spread across Ethan's face, crinkling the corners of his eyes the way she loved. "Really? That's wonderful, Livy." He pulled her close, mindful of Emma, who was now demanding to be let out of her pen. Their life was fuller than either had dared to dream possible that night behind the livery stable in Salida. As they sat down to lunch with their children, in the home they had built together, Olivia caught Ethan's eye across the table. No words were needed. The journey from that desperate night to this blessed day was written in the love that passed between them, in the family they had created, in the second chance they had given each other. Outside the window, the mountains stood as they had for millennia, steadfast and true. Inside, in this home built with love and perseverance, The Coopers lived the dream that had begun with a simple act of kindness, a cowboy who had built a crib before a bed, who had seen what truly mattered, who had offered shelter when it was needed most. And in that shelter, love had bloomed, strong and enduring as the mountains themselves.